Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, Chapter 5, Halacha 2. This is Part 2. We're going to talk a little bit more about the power of the rain, and this is the change in the blessing, the seasonal change in the blessing, and then ultimately it's going to lead into the blessing that we say after Shabbat ends. Now, something to keep in mind, food for thought, is why is it that it's talking about this seasonal change in the Shemona Esrei prayer before we're talking about the change from the Shabbos to the regular day in the prayer when we do the Shemona Esrei in the prayer for understanding. So that's something that's food for thought. Why is this coming first and that's coming second? Something to keep in mind. So in the Mishnah, we were taught that we include the prayer of rain, and in that the statement says, "Who makes the wind blow and the rain falls?" And that goes in the second blessing of the Shemona Esrei. Now, that phrase is recited only in the rainy season. And in the summertime, it's going to be replaced with the words, "Who makes the dew fall?" Now, the Gemara is going to try to figure out the law where one said the wrong phrase. Rabbi Zera says in the name of Rabbi Hanina, if one was standing in the season of rain, but mentioned dew instead, we do not make him go back. But if one is in the season of dew and mentioned rain instead, we make him go back. So why would that be? In other words, the idea is that if he realizes his mistake before he finishes this blessing of who resurrects the dead, he returns back to the start of that blessing. But if he already completed that blessing, he returns to the start of the Shemona Esrei itself. And you could see more about that in the Or Chaim 114.4. In the second case, it's not enough to just go back from the start of the blessing, because the Shemona Esrei's three blessings, the first three, are treated as a single unit. So that if somebody made an error in any of those three blessings, they have to go back to the start of the Shemona Esrei. That's going to be the mechanism for why that is, and you can find out more about that in the Or Chaim. Now, the other thing is, okay, so let's just talk about the structure, right? In the summertime, it says, "Who makes the dew fall?" And it says, "Who makes the dew fall? Who makes the rain fall?" Okay. Now, in the winter time, it says, "Who makes the rain fall?" And the question is going to be, well, what happens in the winter if he says, well, who makes the dew fall? So the idea is, if he says, well, what about the wind, right? Because it says, like, who makes the wind blow instead of who makes the rainfall, right? Let's say he changes it to the wind. Well, the wind, whether you're going to include it or not include it, doesn't affect the validity of the Shemona Esrei. But over here, if you're doing it with the rain, it's going to be or the dew, it's going to be a different issue. Now, in the prayer where it says, "Who makes the wind blow and the rain fall?" That's going to be the custom of the Sephardic Jews and some of the Ashkenaz Jews who have Nusach Sfard, like in Eretz Yisrael. The Ashkenazic Jews, Chutz La'aretz, have a different formula. Okay, so the formula that they'll say, it'll be like, who makes the dew fall, who makes the wind blow. Okay, and they're not mentioning the dew. The Ashkenazi Jews who are in Eretz Yisrael, like the Sephardi Jews everywhere, say, who makes the wind blow and the dew fall. Now, we're not really concerned about a mistake in the wind blowing, okay? We're worried about a mistake if the structure of the dew and the rain is messed with. So again, let's read this again. Rabbi Zera says in the name of Rabbi Hanina, if one was standing in the season of rain, but mentioned dew instead, in other words, he's in the winter and he mentions the summer one, okay, we do not make him go back. But if he's in the season of dew, that's going to be the summertime, and he mentioned rain instead, we do make him go back. So why would that be? And the Gemara is going to give an explanation for it. The reason, basically, for Rabbi Zera's second ruling, which is the one that we really care about, which is that if he's saying if he's in, he's in the summertime and he's mentioning the winter blessing, that's the one that we care about. Why would that be? Okay, so even if the dew was admitted and left out, basically what he's saying is the Shemona Esrei is going to be invalidated and has to be fixed. So the Gemara is gonna challenge this, but we're going to get a deeper insight into why this mechanism would be for the timing. Okay, because that's really what we care about. There's a brisa that teaches the sages did not obligate one to mention dew or winds in the Shemona Esrei, but if one wishes to mention them, he may mention them. In other words, the Ron in commentary on the Bavli in Tanis 3a is basically saying that these rulings apply in both the summer and the winter, and it is not necessary to mention dew or wind at any time because they are never withheld. In other words, that there's always going to be dew and there's always going to be rain, so that if you switched it, says the Ron, basically you didn't say anything that wasn't correct, because there's always going to be dew 365 days a year. So you did say something that was a true statement, right? You didn't mess up and have to go back and recorrect it. Now, the Vilna Goan in Beur Hagra in 114.3 says that the Brisa, which is also in the Bavli, is the basis for the Ashkenaz custom not to mention the dew in the summer. Okay, so that's going to be the note by the Vilna Goan on where this Ashkenaz custom comes from in the blessing. Okay, so we see here that the mentioning of the dew is going to be optional all year round, effectively. So why does Rabbi Zera say that one who omits dew in the summer has to go back and correct this mistake? Now, the Gemara is going to give a different answer for the reasoning of Rabbi Zera. The Gemara says, one who curses is not comparable to one who does not pray and does not curse. In other words, what this is implying and what this is saying is that if somebody goes and they mention rain in the summertime, okay, that's going to be really bad because it's a season where there is no rain. And if you had an unusual rain in the summertime in Eretz Yisrael, you'd be destroying the summer crop of grapes, the summer crop of wheat. It would all become like mildewy. It would start to rot. And this, in the year you get two harvests of wheat. There's a winter and a summer harvest, and or a spring harvest and a fall harvest. So effectively, you'd be damaging half of the food crop because it would get all wet and mildewy. It's effectively a curse. So simply, somebody goes and they omit dew. Well, they don't have to go back and correct the error because there's always going to be dew, right? But now, if you're standing in the season where it's not going to be a time for rain, and you're effectively uttering a prayer for rain, well, that effectively is going to be a curse. And we're not going to be sitting there giving it that sort of weight. Now, let's see what the Or Chaim says. Now, Or Chaim has a commentary on this in 114 in Seif 5. And the Or Chaim is saying that if one mentions both dew and rain in the summer, he would still have to correct himself because of the harmful nature of the rain. And this is going to be also be the opinion of the Ran and the Bach and the Beit Yosef. Now, the Ramban has a different understanding of this altogether, and here's what he says. He says that uh, that this word here, to curse, okay, where it's saying like one who curses is not comparable to one who does not pray and does not curse. He's reading Mikel instead of as curse as to belittle. Okay, and his view is that the Gemara and the Gemara's point is that one who belittles dew by mentioning rain in its place is worse than one who does not mention anything. So, according to this approach, if one mentions both dew and rain in the summer, he's giving dew the proper respect and he would not go back and correct himself. That's going to be the formulation from the Ramban, but that's a minority opinion. Now, the Gemara is going to challenge Rabbi Zera's first ruling, and Rabbi Zera said that if one was in the season of rain but mentions dew instead, we do not make him go back, but this cannot be for a Beraisa, because a Beraisa is going to teach that if in the winter one did not request rain in the blessing of the years, or he did not mention the powers of rain in the blessing of the resurrection of the dead, we make him go back. So this, it seemed, would contradict Rabbi Zera, who's saying that one who admits the power of rain in the winter does not have to go back. So what's going on here? Because we have a brisa here that looks like it's saying the opposite. So you can also find that in the Tosefta in Berechot in 3:13. So why is this going to be like this? I mean, we see in the Mishnah that in the winter, you have the formula where it says, "And give dew and rain for a blessing," and that goes to the ninth blessing in the Shemona Esrei. And that concludes with the phrase, "Who blesses the years," okay? But now the Brisa is going to be speaking about somebody who left this phrase out. So what's going to be happening with this? Now, the Gemara is going to answer this. And the Brisa refers to a case where in the wintertime, one mentioned neither dew nor rain. So what's happening here is he didn't praise Hashem for either the dew or the rain. Okay, and so he would have to correct himself. Okay, Rabbi Zera's point in the beginning was that if somebody gives some praise, whether it's going to be for dew rather than rain, okay, he did give a praise. And what this Bryce is referring to is if somebody left out the mention of dew and rain. So there's a deep theological point going on here where somebody did not mention anything for blessing. In other words, there's no blessing of the creation or recognition of the creation at all here. And that's going to be what's going to be triggering this Beraisa that gets brought up. Now, Rabbi Zera's point is that this guy did make some mention of something. I mean, the point is that, hey, dew falls 365 days a year. And yeah, he was supposed to say for the blessing of the rain in the wintertime, but he just didn't leave it. He just left it out, right? But he did praise something. He praised the dew. So in that case, he would not go back to fix it. He would go back to the start. He would go back to the start of that bracha, but he wouldn't go back to restart his Shemona Esrei. So the idea here is going to be that in the summertime, when water is not going to be as important, okay, even if he doesn't mention any form of rain or dew in the Shemona Esrei, that is going to be valid, okay? Because if you mentioned rain, it would disqualify the prayer, since rain is going to be harmful in the summertime. And that's going to be something that the Rishonim are mentioning. You can see more about that in the Rambam in his Hilchos and Tefillah, and you can see that in the Shulchan Aruch in 114.5, And in the winter time, that's going to be where water is really important, because this is basically the only time of the year that you're going to have a shot to get normal and healthy crops. And if you don't get it, you might have famine issues, right? So this is now going to be the time where the praying is especially important. Now, if somebody is coming along and they have in the winter time where they didn't pray for rain or dew, well, that's really serious, because now you really need the rain. You really need it. So if somebody goes and he only mentions the dew, he doesn't have to repeat the prayer, since there is some praise for Hashem's water-giving power, okay? But if he doesn't mention anything, okay, there's no mention of rain, there's no mention of dew, he has to go back and correct it, because this is now a time where the water is going to be needed. And now, by failing to offer any praise to Hashem in this time, is actually going to be serious. So the idea here is, and you can see more about this in the Or Chaim 117.4, say 4. The idea is that we have to mention that the rain in the winter in the second blessing, but we also have to request it in the ninth blessing, okay? It's so important that it gets mentioned twice, all right? And so we have an obligation to mention for the dew instead of the rain, but that's not really the same as requesting. And if somebody only requests dew in the winter but not the rain, this is an error that has to be fixed. He has to go back to the start of that bracha and restate it. But if he has a situation where he's going back and he's not mentioning either the dew or the rain, he has to go back and redo the whole bracha, because he has to start the Shemona Esrei again, because in a way it's like his prayer is denying the idea, that we have a God that's continuously creating, and that you're like effectively denying God the power to create rain or have something to do with precipitation and like an interaction with Am Yisrael, right? And not only that, we know that there's divine reward and divine punishment, so that you have a lot of people that don't like the idea in Judaism of divine reward and divine punishment. A lot of like modern Orthodox people, or quote unquote open Orthodox people, the first thing they run to do is get rid of divine reward and divine punishment. It's the first thing they edit out, always. And so in a way, if they're leaving out any mention of dew or rain, it's like they're sectarian in a way, because what they're really doing is they're taking away out of the bracha divine reward and divine punishment, because we know that if you're not going to behave, you're not going to follow, well, first thing that gets taken away is your rain. And so in a way, it's like a sectarian argument, and in a way, it's like you're arguing something that's kind of like quote unquote open Orthodox or modern Orthodox, which is that the power of divine reward and divine punishment is somehow limited, and that you can sort of choose and pick your religion, and you can sort of do things where the religion becomes more of like a series of superstitious things that you do, and the mitzvot don't really have the same weight. They really are just like measures of superstition, right? God forbid. Because again, they're taking away this idea of divine reward and divine punishment, and that is a thing of sectarianism. That's why you're saying that this is not really going to be a prayer, and you have to go back and start again, because you've effectively denied God a basic fundamental tool in how the creation works, which is divine reward and divine punishment. So in the earlier passage, in the mention of so I just want to point out one thing, right? So the Gemara is talking about a case where in the wintertime, one is mentioning neither dew nor rain, okay? And this is a case where they literally did not or would not praise Hashem for either of these. Okay, so you have to go back and correct it, because again, if you're not going to correct it, it's really a statement of sectarianism when you dig down into it, where there's going to be a limit to the mechanism of divine reward and divine punishment. That's going to be the issue. So what happens now with the request for rain in the ninth blessing? Now, we mentioned that the second blessing and the ninth blessing are very, very different with regards to dew and rain. In the second blessing, you're not requesting the rain or the dew. You're just acknowledging that Hashem creates it. Now, why, right? That is going to be a fundamental statement of divine reward and divine punishment. Now, you're in a case in the middle part of the body of the Shemona Esrei where you're making your personal requests. And so over here, we say, a blessing in the ninth part to actually request the rain because, we actually need it now, okay? So Rabbi Zera says in the name of Rabbi Huna, if in the winter one did not request in the blessing of the years, and he said it in the prayer of who hears prayer, this is going to be a totally different situation. In other words, there's going to be a question that gets raised here. So the Haredim is going to be unpacking this and saying it as follows. Okay, he's going to be saying that this is what the sugya is saying, says the Haredim. The Rabbi Huna is raising an inquiry that follows like this, asking whether the law he had received from his teachers also applies in this other context. And it's Rabbi Huna who's giving the answer recorded in the continuation of this Gemara. So effectively, what's happening is that in the second part of the bracha, where you're supposed to recognize Hashem's power to create the rain, and implicit in there is a recognition of divine reward and divine punishment, and a God who is continuously and actively creating, and a God who is involved in your affairs and involved in all the details of your life. Okay, but what happens here if he's putting that now, this request, in the second part? So the Gemara reads like this. It says, Rabbi Zera says in the name of Rabbi Huna, if in the winter one did not request rain in the blessing of the years, and he said it in the blessing of who hears prayer, question is raised. And it says, and does the same apply if one did not mention the power of rain in the blessing of the resurrection of the dead? And the question is, may he say it in the blessing of who hears prayer? Okay, so basically what's happening is if he does not say who makes the rain fall in the proper place, okay, the answer is, or the question is, should he then say, this part of the blessing where it says who hears prayer, or does he have to go back and repeat the Shemona Esrei? In other words, would it be a case where, you would return to the blessing of the resurrection of the dead if that's not an option? In other words, what's going to happen here if it gets misplaced and that you did it in the wrong, you just put it into the wrong place, okay? The Gemara is going to answer, okay? And so basically you got mixed up. You're praying, you got mixed up, and you put the wrong thing in the wrong place, okay? You requested the wrong thing in the wrong place. And again, the second bracha that you're doing in the 18, right, is talking about God's power. And in there, you're talking about that God has the power to create dew and rain or make the wind blow, right? Now, if you messed up and you didn't notice it, and now you're putting in something where you actually made a request for rain over there, okay, well, that's not appropriate. So should you be going back and fixing that, right? Or what happens if you already got to the ninth blessing and now you're mixing it up over there? Should you go back? What's going on? So the Gemara says that if the request for rain, which is recited out of pressing need, may be said in the blessing of who hears prayer, then the mention of rain, which is recited out of calm, may certainly be said there. That's the question. So the idea is that, what happens if, he's putting the prayer for rain in the spot where, you're supposed to be praying for Parnassah, so that you're actually praying for that in the part where it says, who hears prayer. Okay, so now it's answering in this other sort of way that you might not have expected. So they're basically saying, well, what happens if they put this over here in the portion that says, who hears prayer? And the Gemara says, the Gemara is basically asking, can it be said, okay, over there in the blessing of who hears prayer, and, over there in the blessing of who hears prayer, that's going to be said, in a way that's very calm, because you're like, it's a request for sustenance, and it's going to be, a question where, even though you have, it says the Pnei Moshe, although the request for rain expresses an urgent need, which does warrant a specific and unalterable place in the Shemona Esrei, it can be shifted to the blessing of who hears prayer. So therefore, the mention of rain, which is merely a praise, can certainly be shifted over there. That's going to be the note by the Pnei Moshe. So the idea is that, well, what happens if it's misplaced? Well, effectively what they're saying is that you can mention, you can make it up again by mentioning it in the blessing of who answers prayer. That's going to be the idea. That's going to be the question, really. So the idea is that, if somebody fails to mention or request rain in the proper place, the question is, can you make it up over there in the spot for who hears prayer? That's really how this is shaping up, okay? So that, let's say you mix it up, and in the second blessing, where it's supposed to be that you're acknowledging Hashem's power to create rain, instead you actually requested it, okay? So that's going to be a mention of rain. So would you go back and start it again? No, right? Because you've actually mentioned rain. Now, what happens if you've actually continued, but you messed up and you didn't acknowledge Hashem's power for rain, and you realize, I want to acknowledge Hashem's power for rain, and I got mixed up, okay? So really what this is saying, or this is asking, is, can you, in who hears prayer, come in and mention the part that you should have done over in part number 2, and mention it over there in who hears prayer, and make it up over there? That's really going to be the question. Alternatively, if you failed to mention something outright in the proper place, can you make it up in who hears prayer? That's going to be a question. And the Gemara is going to say that a Brisa teaches that if in the winter one did not request rain in the blessing of the years, or did not mention the powers of rain in the blessing of the resurrection of the dead, we make him go back. In other words, this is going to be, saying that, specifically that if he omitted the formula from the proper place, which is either going to be the blessing of the years or the resurrection of the dead, this Brisa is implying that this omission alone makes it so that he has to go back, okay? So that you have two different cases going on. What happens if you mix up the blessing where instead of the second blessing where it's supposed to be for praise, that you actually made your request there, okay? So you've acknowledged the water, right? So it could be that you could shift it over to who hears prayer because you did mention something. But what happens if you've actually omitted it altogether? Can you go back and do it in who hears prayer? And this Bryce is saying no. Okay, In other words, that you can't go and fix this error by just adding the formula over there, who hears prayer. Now, the Gemara is going to answer this brisa and interpret a little bit. And Rav Avdimi, the brother of Rabbi Yosef, says, the brisa refers to one who did not say the required formula in the blessing of who hears prayer. And so what it's saying is, only then must he go back. But if he did not yet reach the blessing of who hears prayer, he may proceed with his prayer and insert the formula there. So the Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah 10:8 is saying that the reason is the reason for this is that the blessing of who hears prayer is intended only for requests and is consequently inappropriate for the mention of rain, which expresses praise for Hashem, and that over here, this Yerushalmi is concluding that the request and the mention of rain can be added when necessary to the blessing of who hears prayer. But most Rishonim are looking at the Bavli on this in 29a, and that the mention of rain can never be inserted over there. So the Rambam is saying that the halacha is going to follow this view from the Bavli, and the Or HaChaim 114.6 says that as well, that you can't do that. So that's going to be what the Rishonim are saying. So having taught that one who omitted the request for rain from the blessing of the years says it where who hears prayer, the Gemara is now going to ask about the law of one who omitted it from the later blessing as well. Okay, so what happens if you mentioned one part of it, but you didn't mention the other part? What's going to happen there? So it says, Gemara says, where does he go back to? Does he return back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei, where it says the blessing of the years, or does he go back to who hears prayer? In other words, the Gemara is asking really two questions. Okay, it's really asking, does he have to return to the beginning of the Shemona Esrei or to the blessing where the request for rain is inserted? This is going to be, by the way, the Korban Ada who's pointing out that there's two parts to this. And the second part is that, if, he does return to the blessing, where would that request go in the first place? In other words, are you going to put it in the first part, or are you going to put it in the second part? So we see here that, the Yerushalmi is saying that you can add it to who hears prayer. Okay, now that's not the halacha. The Rishonim don't hold that. Most of the Rishonim don't hold that way, but nonetheless, Yerushalmi has that opinion. So, what is going to be the law where one omitted it from that, later blessing as well? What's going to be? Is he going to have to go back to who hears prayer, or does he actually have to start back from the Shemona Esrei? So even though that the Yerushalmi here is taking a much different approach from what the Rishonim are holding and what the Bavli is holding, nonetheless, this is helping you to understand why we're following the opinion of the Bavli, and to get a deeper understanding of what is the halacha l'maisa, which is that you can't just move it over to who hears prayer and fix it. Okay, that you're going to have to start again. You're going to have to go back. So, but you're going to understand why you have to go back. What's the point of it? And there's a lot of points. One of the points is that you may have had a problem, a deeper theological problem, by taking one part of it out. Okay, that's a very deep theological problem. And as we know in all of the Berechot, that there's always a fear and a worry about sectarianism or shutting down the sectarians. So effectively, you're maybe inadvertently, but you've effectively made an argument that is a sectarian argument, and one that, by the way, pops up again. It's very unpalatable for modern people who are, say, living in New York or California or one of these places like in Tel Aviv. When you tell them there's divine reward and there's divine punishment, it's very unpalatable. So they'll tell you that, well, I put mezuzahs on my door and I'm Jewish in my heart, but they don't like it when you say, like, you have to keep Shabbat and there's a penalty if you don't, and or something bad will happen, and you say, well, it says here in the Torah what's going to happen, and those things are happening, and you should cut it out, and there's divine reward, divine punishment, and they don't like to hear that, right? They don't like any Judaism that has divine reward and divine punishment. So it becomes very problematic in the structure of Shemona Esrei when you start taking out these elements and playing with it. And that's why the Bavli is holding the position that it does, which is that you can't really go back and fix it. Just go back and redo the prayer the way it's supposed to be. And that is going to be a more thorough way to shut down any form of sectarianism. Again, really taking out or limiting the powers of rain brings up sectarian arguments. Because again, read the second part of the Shema. If you don't behave, Hashem will hold back the rain from you. It's mida connected mida. You're being punished from a God who is actively creating. So the Gemara is going to answer, where do you go back to? Okay. So the Gemara says that this is comparable to that which Rabbi Shimon Bar Va says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. In the case of one who did not mention Rosh Chodesh in the blessing of the temple service, the halacha is that if he has already lifted his feet, he returns to the beginning of the prayer. But if he has not yet lifted his feet, he returns to the blessing of the temple service. And the Gemara says, so here too, regarding one who omitted the request for rain, if he lifted his feet, he returns to the beginning of the Shemona Esrei. But if he did not lift his feet, he returns to the blessing of who hears prayer. So I want to look at the Sedei Yeshua commentary to help us to understand this. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Va's statement resolves the first part of the Gemara's two-part question. Okay, so that one who admitted the request for rain returns to the beginning of the Shemona Esrei, but only if he realized the error after moving his feet. Otherwise, he returns to the blessing where it should have been inserted. So, since Rabbi Shimon Bar Va is speaking of Yala of Yavo, which can only be recited in only one blessing, where it's saying Ratzeh, his statement teaches nothing about the second part of the question. So the second part of the question is going to be, what happens if somebody actually omitted the request for rain? What's going to be, does he have to restart the Shemona Esrei? So the Gemara is holding that the logic of this might be so that, one who has not yet reached Shomei Tefillah inserts the request for rain there and does not return to the Baruch Aleinu, right? Even in the case where one who already said Shomei Tefillah, it would be enough for him to add the request for rain there and not go back to the Baruch Aleinu. Okay, so the halacha here says the Rashba in the parallel Bavli 29b is that if somebody realized the error before lifting his feet, he returns back to Shomei Tefillah, in other words, who answers prayer, and that's going to be adopted by the Rashba and Rav Hagon and the Tosafot. But actually, most of the Rishonim are going to say that he actually has to return back to Baruch Aleinu, and the Rambam holds that, and also the Rif and the Ritva holds that. So you can find out more about that By the way, it's also in the Shulchan Aruch and the Orach Chaim 117, Safe 5. So the idea is that you're going to have to return back to to Baruch Aleinu. So it's not enough just to go back to fix it in the portion of who hears prayer. You actually have to go back. So the Gemara now is going to discuss a circumstance that calls for adding the request of rain to the Shemona Esrei in the summer. And it says, in Nineveh, due to a drought, they needed to declare a fast after Pesach. And they went and they asked Rebbe whether they may do it. And Rebbe said to them, go ahead and declare a fast day, provided that you do not deviate from the formula of prayer. In other words, that basically he's saying that you're not allowed to request rain in the blessing of the years. So the Radim is saying that in the summertime, the request for rain is going to be omitted from the blessing of the years. So, effectively, adding this request to the blessing of the summer would deviate from the formula of the prayer. But nonetheless, you're having a public fast for rain, actually without the request for rain in the Shemona Esrei. So this seems to be mind-blowing. What's going on over here? The Gemara is going to ask, and it's going to say, but then where should he, the resident of Nineveh, say it, if not in the blessing of years? In other words, you're having a public fast, and you need to have a request for rain, so where do you put it? And the Gemara is going to answer. Rabbi Yerushalmi thought to say, he says it in the blessing of who hears prayer, and it would seem like this is an urgent thing that you should put it over there. So really, what did Rebbe mean when he says you're not allowed to deviate from the prayer? Because the season has already changed after Pesach. So you're now in the summertime thing, and you're requesting rain. So what does he mean? Rabbi Yerushalmi's answer is going to get challenged there. And Rabbi Yossi said to him, did Rabbi Zera not say the following in the name of Rav Huna, that if one did not request rain in the blessing of the years, or did not mention the power of rain in the blessing of the resurrection of the dead, he recites it in the blessing of who hears prayer. And in such circumstances, the rabbis decreed that one fulfills his obligation to request the rain by inserting the request into the blessing of who hears prayer. So in this way, the blessing is given a formula that's specific to the winter as opposed to the summer. So somebody who inserts this request for rain in that blessing in the summer is basically going to be deviating from this formula of prayer. So the Gemara says, and Rebbe had told the people of Nineveh, go ahead and declare a fast day, provided you do not deviate from the formula of prayer. So the question is, how are you allowed to actually request rain in the blessing of who hears prayer? So Rabbi Yossi is arguing that a resident of Nineveh is not allowed to insert the request for rain even in the blessing of who hears prayer. So the Gemara now is going to be asking, and it's going to say, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, where does he say it? In other words, that it has to be said, but where do you put it? Okay? And the Gemara answers, in one of the 6 blessings that adds on a public fast day. In other words, they're saying that, according to Rabbi Yossi, and according to what the Rosh Cirilio is going to be explaining, he's suggesting that the request for rain is added to the last of these 6 extra blessings for the fast day, where it's talking about who has mercy on the land. Now, on a public fast day, the Shliach Tzibor repeats the prayer, and it ends up adding 6 new prayers, going up to 24 blessings. And included in the 6 extra blessings, okay, it adds Redeemer of Israel, and who heals the sick of his people Israel. And it goes between there. There's 6 blessings that go between the Redeemer of Israel and who heals who heals the sick of his people Israel. And basically, the Rosh Cirilio is pointing out that Rabbi Yossi is pointing out it should go over there where there's a blessing for who has mercy on the land. But the Gemara is going to challenge that question. It seems like a logical place, but the Gemara is going to challenge it. The Gemara says that this answer suffices for the prayer of the community, which has 6 extra blessings, but regarding the prayer of an individual who does not have 6 extra blessings, where is his request for rain going to be added? So the reason that Rabbi Yossi's argument is shut down is Rabbi Yossi's argument is pointing out for a communal blessing, which is 24. So what about for the personal? The Gemara is going to respond, and because again, the person is going to be saying Shemona Esrei with 18. The Shliach Tzibor is going to be adding 6 extra blessings. So very nice that Rabbi Yossi says to put it in the end of over there, but that goes in the community blessing. What about for your farm? What about your field? Well, you don't have that blessing in the personal Shemona Esrei over there. So where is it going to be added? The Gemara is going to answer. Rabbi Hanina says, did not Rabbi Zera say in the following, in the name of Rabbi Huna, an individual may request his needs in the blessing of who hears prayer, and this is one of his needs. In other words, the Gemara is effectively going to be arguing that in the individual part, you put your request for rain in the who hears prayer part, and this, by the way, is going to be in contrast to the extra 6 blessings that the Shliach Tzibor is going to put. Now, the Shliach Tzibor is not allowed to put any request, even a community one, into the repetition of who hears prayer. So, effectively, what Rebbe is saying is he's saying 2 things. Rebbe is saying that don't deviate from the prayer structure, so that you can't have the Shliach Tzibor adding, a request for rain in the part who hears prayer. That's going to be for the individual gets to say that. And effectively, Rabbi Yossi is correct as well, because it's going to be said over there. So effectively, they're sorting out 2 different things, okay? You have the who hears prayer part, and you have 2 other parts. You have the individual part, and you have the community part, okay? Community part is said by the Shliach Tzibor by adding the 6 extra brachas. Now, this drought is being said after the time of Pesach when the change happens. So Rebbe's first point is don't fool around with that. You have to leave it for the summertime. So it says, where do you put it? So in the individual part, you put it in for your who hears prayer. But on the community part, the Shliach Tzibor can't add personal requests into the who hears prayer. He has to have the implication of the rain as the 6th part, where it's talking about who has mercy on the land in the community fast, prayer, in the 6 extra blessings that gets added, so that he just leaves it over there. And that's going to be the point. So that's how this gets sorted out. The Mishnah now is going to talk about a three-way dispute about the placement of Havdalah in the Shemona Esrei. And we're going to be getting into the idea of time change with Havdalah after the Shabbat ends. And, we're putting it into, who grants understanding. Now, we're going to talk about this tomorrow, but one of the key ideas is why did we just deal with the season parts first, okay? Why aren't we talking about the Havdalah part first and who grants understanding? And really, the key reason why it has to be organized this way in the Shas is that the second bracha in the Shemona Esrei is going to be recognizing Hashem's power to create the rain. And creating rain over here is really a hint at divine reward and divine punishment, that there is divine reward and divine punishment. That's being mentioned in the second part. Now, in the ninth part, now you're making a personal request for Hashem to help you, okay? And by the way, at the right time. Our blessings want to be done at the right time. So in the summertime, you don't want to be praying for rain. You don't need rain in the summertime in Eretz Yisrael. You need it in the wintertime. And in fact, if you said it in the summertime, it would be a curse. But the point here is that you have divine reward and divine punishment, and that you can request divine mercy even if you've been a bad boy or a bad girl. You still have the ability to make tshuva and to divine, to ask for divine mercy. But if we were to take those things away, okay, you'd effectively be trying to operate Judaism without any connection with a Kodesh Baruch Hu, with any divine reward and divine punishment. And that is a heresy. And that's why it's so fundamental to be mentioning this with the seasonal changes, and why this has to be done before we start talking about Havdalah and who grants understanding. And that's why it's organized that way. Why you guys have a great day, and we'll continue tomorrow on Havdalah.